we see the heavy use of 360 tools. And when I asked earlier, many of you in the room put up your hand that you're using a 360. And so here we find that of the top companies in Fortune 500, a vast majority of them use 360 tools, and it can have a real impact on awareness and perception and all of that kind of thing. And of course, there's a wide variety of different 360s available, but we would argue that they're not all equal. There are a number of similarities, but there are some major differences. And we're increasingly running into organizations, I know of probably half a dozen I could name right now, where they have banned 360s because of the negative impact that they've had, because they're weakness-based 360s. People don't like it, not a lot of change occurs a year or two later, and we're losing 70 to 80% of the training value. Now what we mean by that is our stats show that roughly, very broadly and generally, in our database, around 20 to as high as 30%, but usually more around 20% have a fatal flaw. And so a traditional 360 will point that out. And so there'll be some benefit for those 20 or 25%, hopefully, that they'll find that out, that there's something that's really, really serious they need to address. But the vast majority of other people that don't have a fatal flaw are then missing out on the benefits of learning what their perceived strengths are and how to build on those strengths. Because as we said earlier, their own self-assessment of their strengths is only half as accurate as everybody else. So learning what everybody else sees as my strengths becomes key. And one of the other problems with a lot of 360s is they beat people up. First of all is simplifying. I don't know if some of you have been part of 360s that take an hour to do. And some of them are incredibly complicated. Some of them are built on competency models that have layers of competencies, layered on layers of supervisors and managers and executives. And we have a number of large international organizations that have thrown all of that stuff out and just said it's gotten way too complicated. We've got survey fatigue happening. We've got people getting these reports back that are just so full of detail that they're overwhelmed with it all. This stuff's got to be simplified. And so that's one of the big things that we do here is simplify this. So we're measuring against key performance outcomes, which we talked about earlier, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit towards the end of the list here. We've talked quite a bit about building strengths, so that's what we're after here, is we're trying to look for what are the strengths, but if they're fatal flaws, we want to know that. We want to, and one of the questions that gets asked then is of these 16 competencies, so every single rater rates what they think are the top 4 competencies for that person's role. So now we don't need all these complicated layers of competencies for supervisors and managers and executives. We can just look at the report and say, okay, well, most of the raters have said these are the top 4 or 5 competencies for this role. Here's the ratings for those competencies. Now let's figure out, are these strengths, are these weaknesses, are they fatal flaws? Well, what do we do with that? So it really simplifies that whole process. Here's another big difference is most 360s will ask, list this person's strengths, which we do as well. And then the next question always is, what are the weaknesses? List this person's weaknesses. We don't ask that question. Our question B is, are there any fatal flaws that will derail this person's leadership effectiveness? That's all we care about. We don't want a list of weaknesses, because if you have 10 people rating you and 2 or 3 of them want to helpfully give you improvement suggestions by listing weaknesses, now you're going to get a list of 20 or 30 of your weaknesses along with a list of maybe 20 or 30 of your strengths. Where are you going to spend most of your time? Which list? You're going to spend most of your list on the weaknesses. What's your level of confidence and feeling this is really useful feedback when you start doing that? And so we just want to know, are there any fatal flaws? And so it only takes about 15 minutes to do one of these, 20 oftentimes at the most. The feedback reports, which we can get you some samples if you want to see them, are very, very simple, easy to read, quite intuitive. At most about 30 pages, 34, 35 pages, depends a bit on how many written comments are added in there, but they're pretty short. We've seen 100, 120 page reports from some 360 tools, just overwhelming. And so it provides real deep insights into how to build your strengths, which again is what we're looking for. We get your direct reports give you feedback on your, basically on their engagement levels. So there's 5 engagement questions. So each leader gets direct engagement feedback on how engaged their direct reports are.